In the world of Warcraft, I think it's safe to say that one of the most infamous zones in the entire game is the Barrens. It might look like a massive empty desert with a pretty boring name, but because of its very central location in Kalimdor, adventurers from all over Azeroth used to converge on the Barrens to do their questing. The endless stretches of dry land mixed in with a massive amount of inexperienced Horde members turned the Barrens into a true World of Warcraft phenomenon. A perfect example of what way too much time under the scorching Kalimdor sun can do to your mind. In this video, we'll look back at the history and the lore behind this iconic zone, and then we'll also have a look at the strange psychological toll it had on the people who passed through here. The history of the Barrens stretches back tens of thousands of years to a time when the Night Elf Empire ruled over the vast supercontinent of Kalimdor. Back then, the Barrens looked nothing like the dry wilderness we see today. It was a lush, thriving forest filled with life and overflowing with arcane energy, which was a direct result of the Night Elves' deep connection to nature and of course their mastery over the arcane, all fueled by the magical source of energy known as the Well of Eternity. The Well of Eternity was a vast shimmering lake of raw power formed from the very lifeblood of Azeroth's world soul. It came into being when Aman'Thul, leader of the Titan Pantheon, tore one of the old gods from the planet's surface, leaving behind a wound that bled pure energy. The forests that once covered the region where the Barrens are now located were important enough for Queen Azshara to order the construction of an outpost there. The settlement, known as Thrall, became a small but vital part of the Night Elf Empire's golden age. So we know for certain that this land was once alive with Night Elf presence over 10,000 years ago. But as we all know, that age of prosperity would not last. The Night Elves' thirst for power turned to greed, and that greed eventually turned to madness. A madness that set off the events that would shatter their glorious empire and reshape the entire world of Azeroth forever. Queen Azshara and her loyal circle of highborn Night Elves pushed their experiments with the Well of Eternity too far. Their reckless use of its power sent ripples of energy across the cosmos, echoes that reached the very darkest corners of the Great Dark Beyond, essentially painting a massive target on Azeroth's back. Out amongst those stars, the Burning Legion and their leader Sargeras were on their burning crusade, searching for new worlds to destroy and world souls to annihilate. Through their arrogance, the Night Elves had unknowingly invited the Burning Legion to our precious world. Sargeras set his sights on Azeroth, but to reach it, he would need help from within the world itself. The first of the Highborn to hear the Legion's whispers was Xavius, one of the most powerful sorcerers Azeroth has ever seen and also the High Counselor to Queen Azshara herself. Under commands from the Queen, Xavius drew upon the Well of Eternity's power to construct a massive portal deep within its waters. With the portal complete, Sargeras began sending his agents through. Soon, the Legion's forces clashed with a growing resistance on Azeroth, made up of Night Elves who refused to surrender their world. Known as the Kaldorei Resistance, this force united the people of Azeroth, and even the mighty Wild Gods, the Dragon Aspects, and countless smaller races all came together to defend their home. And with that, the War of the Ancients had begun, the desperate battle to save Azeroth from annihilation. The war eventually reached the forests that once stood where the Barrens are today. The Burning Legion swept through the trees, destroying everything in sight, and that continued until they encountered the White Wolf. As mentioned earlier, Azeroth was and still is home to many wild gods, primal beings tied to nature and life itself. Their exact origins aren't fully known, but it's believed that they were created when the Titan Freya spread life and nature across the ordered world. What the Legion didn't realise though, was that they had just entered the territory of the White Wolf Ancient. Galdrin, also known as Logosh, hunted alone, preying on the agents of the Legion passing through the forests. It is said that many of his battles took place right where the Barrens now lie. Eventually though, the sheer number of Legion forces proved too much for the White Wolf. Galdrin was overwhelmed and fell in battle, his wounds too great to recover from. But even after death, his spirit carried on, and the story of the White Wolf was passed down through generations of people, slowly becoming a lasting legend. The war would rage on across Kalimdor, but in the end, the Kaldorei resistance prevailed. They pushed the Burning Legion back to their portal at the Well of Eternity, and Malfurion managed to reverse the flow of its power. The well, however, could not withstand this strain. The energies twisting within it reached a breaking point, the Well of Eternity imploded, and the very world broke apart. Nearly 80% of Kalimdor's landmass was destroyed in what became known as the Great Sundering. The vast forests of central Kalimdor were obliterated. Mountains rose and fell, and only scattered pockets of greenery survived. Where there was once endless forests, there were now open skies and scorched earth. Flat plains and dry deserts baked under the relentless sun, and the Barrens had been born. During the War of the Ancients, Jared Shadowsong, commander of the Kaldorei resistance, formed an alliance with a native race known as the Tauren. They fought alongside the Kaldorei resistance to defend their homeland, and after the Great Sundering, they resettled across the new landscape, in regions we now know as the Barrens, Mulgore, and Desolace, a kind of central belt across Kalimdor. Their skill as hunters of the great beasts of Kalimdor allowed them to live in peace, fully living off the land in a simple, nomadic, hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But even as one of the dominant races of central Kalimdor for thousands of years, the Tauren would eventually face a new and relentless threat. Around 1,000 years ago, they came under constant attack from a savage new enemy, the centaur. The centaur are brutal, half-human, half-horse humanoids that roam and terrorize the central plains of Kalimdor. Their civilization is harsh and primitive, bitter and full of hatred. They multiplied quickly and spread across Kalimdor, driving the Tauren from their settlements in Desolace and Mulgore and beginning a long, brutal war between the two races. Of course, with all of this talk of battles between the Tauren and the centaur, it's easy to forget that the Barrens were still part of central Kalimdor's wider ecosystem. It wasn't completely unusual to see the occasional night elf travelling through the Barrens. It was certainly rare though, and what was even more rare is if they were on their own and crying. To the north of the Barrens lies Ashenvale, a forest that managed to keep most of its magic after the Great Sundering. It became one of the new settlements for the Night Elves, who rebuilt their society among the trees after the fall of their great empire. Their new way of life was built on purity, balance and peace, but even in a society that was striving for harmony, betrayal was still a part of their daily lives. One story tells us of a night elf named Tauren. He returned home one day to find his partner in the arms of another elf. Heartbroken and consumed by despair, Tauren wandered south into the Barrens, searching for something. Peace, answers, maybe even a reason to keep going. But what he found there was much darker. As he cried out in pain, the sands where he stood began to shift. As the sands parted, an axe emerged from the ground, as if the Barrens themselves had given him the answer to his problems. Tauren took up the weapon and returned home. In a fit of rage, he committed a terrible act. Realizing the horror of what he had just done, Tauren fled to the coast and hurled the axe into the sea, hoping to bury both the weapon and his guilt forever. We need to fast forward in time here, to the point where the Orcs first arrived on Kalimdor. Now, most of us know the major plots of that story. The Orcs invaded Azeroth in Year Zero, sacked Stormwind, pushed north into Lordaeron, and after suffering heavy losses, were eventually driven back to the Dark Portal. Many fled back to Draenor, but some remained behind. Those who did were soon captured and placed in internment camps. In one of those camps in Lordaeron, a young orphaned orc named Thrall was being raised as a gladiator slave. He would eventually escape, reunite with remaining free orcs, and begin rebuilding the Horde. And then he was guided by a mysterious vision from an oracle. Thrall led his people across the Great Sea, leaving Lordaeron behind in search of a new destiny. After a quick stop to aid the Darkspear trolls on their island, the orcs finally made landfall on the shores of Kalimdor. Now, we've covered this entire story in much more depth in our Durotar and Orc Origins video. But as the Orcs journeyed inland, Thrall's group discovered signs of battle. Eventually, Thrall and his troops met a band of tauren, led by an aging but powerful chieftain named Cairn Bloodhoof. Cairn praised the Orcs for their strength in battle, and after introductions, Thrall told him of the Orcs' search for the Oracle, who was said to dwell in the northern mountains somewhere. When Thrall mentioned seeing a large centaur army moving that way, Cairn realised his village was in danger and rushed to defend it. Thrall, eager to help and learn more about the Oracle, followed with his army. Together they fought side by side and drove back the centaur assault. After the battle, Cairn told Thrall of his people's struggle, how the centaur had driven off all the prey and forced the tauren to cross the barren plains in search of safety. Fearing they wouldn't survive the journey, Cairn accepted Thrall's offer to escort them across the plains in exchange for guidance to the Oracle's location. With the Orcs' help, Cairn and his tribe reclaimed the grasslands of Mulgore and built their home atop the mesas of Thunderbluff. The Orcs eventually found the Oracle and learned the truth of their destiny. The Oracle, who was revealed to be the mage Medivh, urged them to join forces with the humans of Azeroth and stand together against the return of the Burning Legion. Before long, the Legion marched on the Night Elven stronghold near the summit of Mount Hyjal. The remaining defenders of Azeroth, the Night Elves, the humans, the tauren, the Orcs, all gathered there for one final stand to protect their world. When Malfurion raised the Horn of Cenarius, its call echoed through the forests, and the Wisps responded as one, channeling their energy into Nordrassil. The explosion ripped through the mountain, vaporizing Archimonde and his army, and with that, the Legion's second invasion of Azeroth had ended, and the world had been saved again. After the war, the Orcs returned to the Barrens in search of a place to call their own. Travelling east, they crossed the Great South Fury River and settled along the rocky coast beyond it. There, they claimed the lands as their new home, naming it Durotar in honour of Thrall's father. From that point on, the Orcs began building their great stronghold and shaping a new future for the Horde. But the Orcs weren't the only ones to settle in Kalimdor after the Third War. Jaina Proudmoore and her human forces also made their way south, establishing the port city of Theramore along the eastern coast of Dustwallow Marsh. By the 24th year, the Barrens had become a neutral stretch of land between the New Horde's territory and the Alliance settlements to the south. For a time, there was an uneasy peace between these two factions, but as we know, that calm wouldn't last. Across Kalimdor, hidden agents of the Burning Legion were still at work. One of the surviving demons was a manipulator named Smodlor. He set his sights on a splintered remnant of the old Burning Blade clan, a clan of Orcs who had once served the Burning Legion. While most of the clan had now rejected their demonic ties after the war, a small group of them still clung to their old loyalties, and Smodlor easily infiltrated them. But he didn't stop there. The demon began recruiting from both sides of the Alliance and the Horde. To the Orcs, he promised a crusade that would purge the humans from Kalimdor. To the humans, he promised the same mission, to wipe out the Orcs. Through deception, he had become a master of puppets, pulling strings in both factions' camps. Two of his key pawns were Kristoff, Chamberlain of Theramore and Jaina's chief administrator, and Berks, one of Thrall's trusted warriors. Under Smodlor's orders, Kristoff strengthened the Alliance garrison at North Watch Hold, a fortress on the southern edge of the Barrens. Meanwhile, Berks convinced Thrall to let him lead a force of 600 Orcs south to investigate what was happening at North Watch Hold. When Berks arrived at North Watch, he issued an ultimatum to the humans: dismantle the keep and leave the Barrens within the hour, or face annihilation. When the humans refused, Berks ordered the attack. As soon as word reached Orgrimmar, Thrall travelled south and confronted the Chaos himself. He stopped the fighting and publicly denounced Berks. The immediate conflict had been stopped, but the damage was already done between the two factions. Distrust and anger were soon spreading across both continents, and other political events boiled over, to the point where within a year, Azeroth once again descended into open war as the peace between the Horde and the Alliance was shattered. With war spreading across Azeroth once again, the Horde moved to claim the Barrens for themselves. They built outposts, watchtowers and strongholds across the land, the most notable being the Crossroads, which sat at the intersection of two major trade routes in the region, and also Camp Taurajo, a tauren settlement near the border of Mulgore. With the Barrens serving as one of the only land routes into Durotar, the Horde made sure that the region was well defended against any potential Alliance assaults. The Alliance of Northwatch Hold worked to fortify their stronghold. They kept the fortress well stocked with soldiers and weapons, ready to serve as the first line of defence should the Horde ever march toward Theramore. This growing Alliance presence became a foothold, well, more like a stepping stone for more troops to arrive. In the southern Barrens, just where the hills begin to fall away into the Dustwallow Marsh and the path toward Thousand Needles, the Stonespire tauren lived peacefully off the land. For generations they thrived in one of Azeroth's quieter corners. But their peace wouldn't last. The dwarves soon arrived. Driven by their endless quest to uncover the ancient secrets buried beneath Azeroth's sands and detecting faint traces of titanic energy beneath the Barrens, they pushed the Stonespire tribe from their lands and began large-scale excavations in the area. Before long, the dwarves unearthed signs of ancient titan complexes buried deep beneath the mountains. They established a permanent outpost there, naming the site Bael Modan, and constructed Baeldun Keep to oversee the research and protect the dig site. The Horde, however, wasn't about to let them dig unchecked through tauren territory. Not long after, travellers across the southern Barrens began encountering Gan Stonespire, a displaced tauren desperate to reclaim his people's home. Gan enlisted Horde adventurers to strike back. Together, they were sent in to Bael Modan and assassinated Prospector Khazgorm, leader of the dig site, a small but symbolic victory for his tribe. And even so, the dwarves pressed on. During the continued excavation, a miner named Feegly uncovered a strange relic known as the Tear of the Moons, a crystal said to hold the power to transform those who possessed it. Before its true nature could be studied, the site's overseer locked it away in Baeldun Keep, but Feegly had already been touched by its influence. His mind became clouded with obsession, and he was soon exiled from the dig site for erratic behaviour. Mad with curiosity, Feegly later approached Horde adventurers on his own, paying them to sneak into Baeldun Keep and retrieve the tear for him. When they returned it, the relic's true power revealed itself. Feegly transformed before their eyes into a monstrous trog. In the chaos, he dropped the crystal and fled into the hills, leaving behind nothing but rumours and questions about the fate of the exiled dwarf and the relic that changed him. The dwarves weren't the only newcomers to claim a piece of the Barrens though. Around the time Durotar was founded after the Third War, Thrall sought the help of goblin engineers to construct his new capital. Among them was Monty Gazlowe, a brilliant inventor who had left his home of Undermine to work with the Steamweedle cartel on their ventures across Kalimdor. Word of Gazlowe's engineering skill soon reached Thrall, who hired him as the chief engineer overseeing the construction of Orgrimmar. The project was a massive success and Gazlowe earned a small fortune for his work. When the fortress was finally complete, he decided to strike out on his own, heading south into the Barrens. There, on the eastern coast of central Kalimdor, Gazlowe founded the port town of Ratchet. What began as a modest trading post quickly grew into a bustling hub, and over time, a haven for smugglers, pirates, and all manner of shady dealings. Despite its dodgy reputation, Ratchet became an essential port for travellers and traders alike, serving as the main sea route between Kalimdor and Booty Bay in the southern eastern kingdoms. But Ratchet wasn't the only part of the Barrens under Goblin control. In the far northeast, there was a small pool of sparkling blue water that once served as a clean and fresh water source for the native tauren and the local wildlife. But that, of course, didn't last long either. Another goblin cartel soon arrived, eager to claim their share of the Barrens: the Venture Company. The Venture Company are infamous across Azeroth for stripping lands of their natural resources, and while the Barrens might have looked, well, barren, it had something extremely valuable beneath it: oil. The goblins quickly set up a massive drilling operation over the lake, transforming the once pristine oasis into a polluted industrial site known as the Sludge Fen. Pipes, pumps, and smoke filled the air as the Venture Company drew this precious resource from Azeroth. Many adventurers would find themselves tangled up in the company's schemes and the messy politics of oil and power. But despite all of this, further south, even more interesting events were beginning to take place. Whilst all the drama was unfolding across the surface of the Barrens, something else was happening deep beneath it. For generations, rumours had circulated that the dry, sun-scorched Barrens sat on top of a hidden world, vast caverns filled with lush vegetation and fresh water. Most had dismissed this as a myth until a night elf druid named Naralax proved these stories to be true. Naralax was no ordinary druid. He was ancient, wise, and one of the original founders of the Cenarian Circle over 9,000 years ago. While travelling through the Barrens with his closest disciples, Naralex noticed something strange, an unnatural burst of green growth sprouting from the other side of a rocky ridge. Following it, they discovered a small oasis, and beyond it, an entrance descending into the earth. What they found below would change the Barrens forever. The group had uncovered a vast network of underground caverns, a hidden ecosystem beneath the desert. Underground rivers flowed for miles beneath the savannah, feeding small streams that bubbled up to the surface above. But even as they marvelled at the discovery, the druids felt uneasy. The wind that whistled through the caves carried a mournful tone, a haunting wail that gave the place its name, the Wailing Caverns. Naralex became convinced that he could use these waters in the caverns to restore the Barrens to their ancient state. But his plan was a bit ambitious. He would connect the underground rivers to the Emerald Dream, the pristine spirit realm of Azeroth, the perfect mirror version of the world that was untouched by war and corruption. Settling into his meditation, Naralex opened himself to the dream. But instead of harmony, he found horror. His mind was overwhelmed by the Emerald Nightmare, the dark, corrupted reflection of the dream. Trapped in now an eternal sleep, Naralex unknowingly channeled the nightmare's corruption into the caverns. The waters turned foul, the creatures of the caverns warped into deviant monstrosities, and his own followers lost their minds. Word of this corruption spread quickly through the Barrens and finally reached the Horde. Fearing for what this growing darkness could mean for the Barrens, they sent adventurers into the depths on a rescue mission. When they arrived in the caverns, they met Muyo, the last uncorrupted disciple of Naralex. He guided them through the caverns, and together they fought back the corruption, freed the lost druids, and finally reawakened Naralex from his cursed slumber. When they returned to the surface, they were hailed as heroes across the Barrens, but the corruption from within the caverns hadn't been fully put out, and it would come back to bite them. Now, if you've spent any time wandering through the Barrens, you're probably wondering by this point, why on earth haven't I mentioned the Quilboar? So, let's fix it. The Quilboar are aggressive boar-like humanoids that can be found across Kalimdor. With razor-sharp spines jutting from their backs and a fierce tribal nature, they're known for being both fearless and very territorial. They're the very same beasts that the Orcs had to fight fiercely against for control of the Barrens and the land that later became known as Durotar. You can find them scattered across much of central Kalimdor, but the Barrens is truly their homeland. Their main stronghold lies in the southern Barrens, a massive network of thorns and tunnels known as Razorfen Kraul. At first glance, it looks like a dark and overgrown maze buried at the bottom of the desert, but the story behind this place is far more interesting than it might seem. Winding the clock back to the War of the Ancients, just as the White Wolf Goldrin stood his ground against the Burning Legion, another wild god did the same, Agamagan, the Great Boar. During the war, Cenarius called upon the wild gods to join the Kaldori resistance against the Legion's invasion of Zinajari, the Night Elf capital, and Agamagan answered that call. With unstoppable fury, he tore through the demonic ranks. It's said that the Great Boar even clashed with the Pit Lord Manaroth himself, but despite his strength, he was eventually overwhelmed by the endless tide of demons, just like Goldrin. He sacrificed himself to buy Malfurion Stormrage and his allies enough time to reach the Well of Eternity. Where Agamagan's blood soaked into the ground, massive thorn-covered vines erupted from the earth. The Quilboar that had survived the Great Sundering came to inhabit these thorned lands. In modern times, as we know, the Horde and the Quilboar remain locked in constant conflict across central Kalimdor, with the Quilboar at the time being led by Chalga Razorflank, an aggressive, powerful Quilboar who was even rumoured to be in contact with the Scourge. Concerned by her growing influence, the Horde sent a band of adventurers deep into Razorfen Kraul to eliminate Chalga and her forces. Now, we've got to step away from the usual lore timeline for a moment here, because the Barrens aren't just known for its history. It was also home to one of World of Warcraft's most famous phenomena. If you've ever spent any real time under the scorching Kalimdor sun, endlessly trekking across the Barrens, fighting Quilboar, slaying harpies, taking down centaur, then you already know what I'm about to talk about. The heat, the grind, and the endless quests. slowly started to break people. Horde adventurers began to lose their minds, and their frustration spilled out in what became known as Barrens Chat. Across the Barrens, members of the Horde began talking with each other about utter nonsense. They would mock each other's races, give false directions to quests, insult each other's mothers, and of course shout endless Chuck Norris jokes. The Barrens Chat became an experience, a social meltdown under the Kalimdor sun. To make things worse, Alliance raids often swept through the Crossroads, killing quest givers and significant orcs left, right and centre. Imagine this: you've just spent 2 hours chasing zebra across the desert. You return to the Crossroads for another quest, and before you can get a drink, you're told to head back out into the desert to find the missing wife of an orc named Mankrik. But when you ask others for help, they either insult you, insult your mother, or deliberately send you in the wrong direction. And then when you finally find Mankrik's wife and return to him with news, you find him to have been slain by the Alliance. At that point, what else can you do but to join the madness of the Barrens Chat? This chaotic phenomenon carried on for years, a condition that was shared by the majority of Horde adventurers. But eventually, the Barrens and its hysteria would come to an abrupt end in the 28th year. As personal feuding within the Horde reached new heights, the skies turned red and the earth began to shake. Without warning, Deathwing the Destroyer tore across Kalimdor, his fury reshaping the entire continent itself, and the Barrens was devastated. A massive molten rift split the Barrens into 2 separate regions, a fiery canyon of lava and ash that survivors would later call the Great Divide. From that moment on, the once unified region had become 2, the Northern Barrens and the Southern Barrens. But the chaos of Deathwing's destruction had stirred up old threats. The centaur emerged, seizing the opportunity to kick the Horde whilst they were down. Preoccupied with his growing war against the Alliance, Garrosh Hellscream created an elite Horde strike force known as the Garrod Krah, a group of the finest warriors from across Azeroth. Under the command of Battlemaster Brong, their first mission was clear: eliminate the High Khan Aratas and his centaur army. One Garrod Krah team ventured into the Northern Barrens to confront Aratas and his so-called Perfect Ones. The battle that followed was chaotic. The team was so disorganised and they only managed victory thanks to the unexpected help of an orc drifter named Malgar. Though disastrous, the fight marked the end of the centaur threat in the Barrens. Now further south in the Southern Barrens, that's where things really began to heat up. The Cataclysm had torn the land apart, splitting the ground and reshaping the region with massive ruptures. Horde settlements across the Southern Barrens had been completely wiped out, and now terrified of being left in this vulnerable state, the Tauren of Thunderbluff constructed the Great Gate, a colossal barrier built to protect Mulgore from any attacks or outsiders. Not far from this gate, a strange growth began to emerge near the old entrance to the Wailing Caverns. The long-lost work of Naralex and his druids seemed to be spilling back into the Barrens, creating a dense and fast-spreading jungle. At first, it appeared to be a sign of renewal, life finally returning to the desert. But this new growth proved to be far from harmless. The plants themselves became hostile, attacking anyone who ventured too close. Meanwhile, both the Alliance and the Horde started constructing new outposts across the Southern Barrens as open war loomed once again. Their conflict centred around a narrow stretch of land known as the Battle Scar, a natural bottleneck between the Horde and Alliance territory. The South remained in this kind of stalemate for years, while tensions in the Northern Barrens began to boil over. During the events of Pandaria, Garrosh Hellscream made a fatal political move, ordering the assassination of Vol'jin, the leader of the Darkspear Trolls. Although the attempt on Vol'jin's life failed, the damage it did to the Horde was catastrophic. Garrosh's actions ignited deep unrest within the Horde, and from that unrest, the Darkspear Rebellion was born. An open revolt led by Vol'jin himself, determined to end Garrosh's tyrannical rule. In response to the formation of the rebellion, Garrosh doubled down. He deployed his personal guard, the Korkron, to the Northern Barrens and ordered the construction of new fortifications, lumber yards, refineries, supply depots, all to fuel his growing war machine. To strengthen these forces, he partnered with the Blackfuse Company, a goblin weapons manufacturer known for its ruthless efficiency and deadly inventions. As the rebellion spread across Kalimdor, the Darkspear joined forces with the Alliance, and together they clashed against the Kor'kron forces in the Northern Barrens. Eventually the rebellion pushed through Garrosh's defences and carved a clear path toward the Horde's capital, and then what followed was of course the Siege of Orgrimmar, the final stand to put an end to Garrosh once and for all. Around 5 years later, after the Legion's third invasion and the events on Draenor, the Fourth War erupted across Azeroth. The conflict escalated into a full-scale world war, with both factions seeking the total destruction of the other. But following the battle, both factions finally agreed to a ceasefire, bringing the Fourth War to an uneasy end. In the years that followed, Rexxar and Zkhan, two prominent Horde members who were ordered by the Council to look over the entirety of Horde holdings across Kalimdor. They also noticed that the Barrens had grown quiet since the war's end. The same old dangers were still lurking beneath the sun-baked sands. The centaur were still roaming, the Quilboar still defend their Kraul, and the Horde and the Alliance still watch over each other carefully from their strongholds. And there we have it, the full history and lore of the Barrens. From its ancient days as a lush, thriving forest, to the battlefield of the Burning Legion, and finally to the sun-scorched desert we know today, the Barrens has seen it all. Its heat baking the minds of countless Horde adventurers for years and years. For one reason or another, the Barrens remains one of the most iconic and infamous zones in all of Warcraft history.